I went over to Somalia with 287 infantry, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry, out of the 2nd Brigade of the 10th Mountain Division from Fort Drum, New York. And we left in on military aircraft in December of 1992, and flew. It was actually we went down to I think an Air Force base in New Jersey, and from there flew on C-141s across or AC-141 across the Atlantic. I mean, the entire battalion wasn't in this plane. It was just certain elements, to include the commander, and some of the command group, and myself. And we flew into, if I'm remembering this right, an airfield called Cairo West, which is, as it sounds, just outside of Cairo in Egypt, for, I believe, some sort of resupply or refueling. But I also remember that trip, that flight, we did an air-to-air refueling, I presume either somewhere over the Atlantic, if it was that leg, or somewhere between Cairo and Somalia. And it was the one and only time in my entire life that I got airsick, because there was some sort of a problem making getting the hose interconnect into the sort of the port on the C-141 that was required to make the refueling happen. And the plane, as a result, was just jerking up and down for about half an hour as the pilots tried to make this happen. And not only I, but lots of other people on the plane were just throwing up as a result. And then we got to Somalia. That was a fascinating learning experience, as I may have mentioned before. I found as a young reporter at Army Times that every day in the field, particularly deployed in a real world operation, every day in the field was sort of like worth a couple of weeks back in Washington in terms of learning about the Army. Maybe sometimes it might have been more like a month back in Washington. I was just a sponge at that point for all of the terminology, all of the sort of procedures, the command and control procedures, that sort of thing. Somalia was very interesting. The battalion was quite well led by a battalion commander called Jim Sykes, and it was particularly interesting because it was clear that there were extraordinary challenges with the mission, mostly because the mission was rather confused. And although US forces were being sent there to sort of keep the peace to a degree and help mitigate the famine there, the famine was basically human caused, because what was bizarre and what struck a lot of the soldiers as bizarre was, as you drove around parts of Somalia, there were fields of corn growing. I mean, it was, I caused a very minor controversy by quoting a soldier as saying, as we were driving through some, on a multi-hour convoy mission. Maybe they don't like corn. As he looks, looks around and there's just corn everywhere. So that was interesting. It was the first time I'd heard a sort of shot fired in anger. It was not because of there being any real combat while I was there with the unit that I was embedded with, but we were at a sort of local town headquarters of somebody or other, some local authority, and a shot definitely rang out. And I remember the platoon leader, I think, who clearly, probably wisely, didn't want the reporter to get shot, on his watch, asked me to quite urgently to crawl under his Humvee while they waited to see what was going on. It was the only round fired, probably somebody just trying to see what would happen, what the Americans would do if they shot a round off. We were at Wan Lewain and Bellatwain, which were two towns right basically beside each other. And there's a Bellatwain, I think it was the name of the air base. It was a sort of an air base that I think the Soviets had built back when they had an interest in Somalia, and it was built in basically a part of the country where all the dirt was red, and that's something that I remember quite clearly. Is there was this fine red dirt that would get everywhere. So that was Somalia. We went to one or two other places. Went down to Merka, a port town further south, and that again just sort of gave you a sense of how anarchic the situation was on the ground in Somalia and how poorly understood it was back in Washington, D.C.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there was I believe there were some barges, and I'm scraping sort of 31-year-old memories out of my mind now. But there was a supply of aid in sort of sacks. You've probably seen these on the news or whatever, sacks of UN aid or something, or even US aid, and sort of probably bags of rice or sacks of rice and flour and things like that. And from the command post that the battalion established in Merka, they could see these sacks. And I'm trying to remember whether they were on the port, on like a pier, or whether they were on a floating barge. I have a feeling it was a barge. But anyway, what they watched was basically these things just getting stolen all the time by people. And as they developed the situation somewhat, it was clear that there was a sort of a layer after layer after layer of corruption in which almost nobody had clean hands with whom the Americans were dealing. So I remember that. And I went back to Somalia I stayed there for about a month or a little bit more than a month, December 92 to January 93. And then I wanted very much to go back in the fall, but my editor at the time didn't want me to. And as a result, I missed being the only US-based reporter in the Battle of Mogadishu in October 1993. After that, she changed her mind, and I was then allowed to go back for basically to cover part of the US withdrawal from Somalia in about February of 1994. Haiti was actually, I was embedded with the sister battalion of the battalion with whom I was embedded in Somalia. This time I was embedded with 187 Infantry from the 10th Mountain Division. And on this occasion, obviously you wouldn't remember this. Some of your older viewers might. The United States was trying to persuade the ruling junta in Haiti to basically resign and leave their positions peacefully, so that the elected president of Haiti could be reinstalled in power. And it got quite tense, and the United States basically deployed a force into the waters around Haiti on different aircraft carriers and other sort of flat top, Navy flat top ships that could basically conduct an invasion of Haiti if required. And at the 11th hour, almost literally, the junta agreed to go quietly. So the 82nd Airborne Division didn't have to parachute into Haiti, and Joint Special Operations Command didn't have to do a sort of series of big raids. And the folks that I was with, 187 Infantry, who by now were ensconced on the USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier with, part of the 10th Mountains Aviation Brigade, the helicopter unit. Their mission got changed to sort of a more peaceful air assault into the seaport of Port-au-Prince, the actual sort of piers, the port complex. And that's where I stayed with them for a number of weeks. And after that, I mean, Haiti was, it was not as badly off as Somalia was, because Somalia was as bad as any place I've ever been in terms of quality of life, standard of living, and so forth. Very, really Hobbesian environment. Haiti wasn't as bad as that, but it wasn't far off. And so I stayed with the battalion, writing stories. I can't remember that many of them, to be honest with you, for a few weeks. And then I shifted to embed briefly with some Special Forces guys from 3rd Special Forces Group, I believe. And they were actually involved in a shooting incident. One of their soldiers was shot and wounded, but that happened like literally the day after I left to go to start making my way back to the United States. So I missed all the action. But that was another great experience. And then the Balkans was, and I got to get my years right. So the Haiti was 1994. And I went back again, I think a couple of times actually. I think back in 1995, I was with the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Haiti. I'm trying to think if they had changed their name formally to Light Cavalry Regiment at that point. But anyway, they didn't have tanks in Haiti, and that was another just interesting period. And then the Balkans, which was really Bosnia, was Christmas and New Year's and January of 1995 to 1996. And I embedded with a cavalry squadron, the 1st Armored Division's cavalry squadron, which was 1 Cav out of Büdingen, Germany, I believe. And together with another of the great photographers I've been fortunate enough to work with, Steve Elfers, from Army Times. We linked up with the squadron in Germany, and then basically literally rode buses down to Croatia with them. Think I'm getting this right. I did a lot of Europe to, or several Europe to the Balkans embeds, and I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Because I know that we took a we took an SUV that we'd rented in Germany down for the trip. And I can't remember whether Steve was driving it. I know I wasn't driving it down, but it might have been that Steve drove it down and then I rode on the bus or something like that. Or maybe we loaded it onto a transporter, one of the Army's transporters. I can't remember. I suspect Steve drove it down, maybe with me riding shotgun for part of the time. But anyway, we were doing exactly what we had promised the rental company we would not do, which was take it into the Balkans, take it into the former Yugoslavia. And we went into Bosnia. The thing I remember first was it was very cold in Croatia. And one of the sergeants with who in the squadron, not in the exact unit, I think, that we were embedded with, was killed in Bosnia, I think, trying to be too clever and help and basically diffuse a landmine using his Leatherman. And he failed, and there was no reason he should have been doing it. I think some kids had pointed it out to him, and he thought it'd be clever and diffuse it himself, and it just blew up in his face, literally. And the Sava River, which was the river that bordered, that separated Bosnia and Croatia, flooded, and it did so while there was a US Army engineering unit trying to build a bridge across the Sava River that the heavy forces, the squadron I was embedded in, 1 Cav, from 1st Armored Division, was supposed to drive their vehicles over. And so this poor engineering unit had pitched all their tents in the floodplain of the river, and they all got flooded out of them. That was a bit embarrassing for them. Eventually, they got the bridge built, and we went across. I was in the first Humvee over that bridge. There were I think some tanks and maybe Bradleys that went, 3 or 4 that went across but I think I was in the fourth or fifth vehicle over the bridge, which was the troop commander's Humvee, the troop that I was embedded with. That was another great learning experience. No combat there. I mean, they'd had a lot of combat, but the United States forces were there to sort of enforce the peace treaty that the various sides had signed at Dayton Air Force Base. So those were most of my Balkan or at least my mid-90s experiences. I also ended up in 2000. Got to get my dates right here. I believe in 1999 in Task Force Hawk, which was an Apache task force built around Apache helicopters that had been sent in to try to it had been sent into Kosovo to basically side with the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo as they defended themselves against the Serbs. And it was a very controversial deployment in the Pentagon and in the US government. And in the end, the European Command did not get approval to launch the Apaches into Albania. So they sat, into Kosovo. So they sat at Tirana Air Base in Albania, flying sort of mission rehearsals. And tragically, one of the helicopters crashed, killing two of the pilots. And of course, that didn't persuade anybody in the Pentagon that to look more kindly on European Command's requests to authorize them to fly combat missions into Kosovo. But I made a lot of good contacts on that deployment. It was also notable because Tirana airfield in Albania is built on rocks that aren't very permeable, and so the layer of dirt, that the tents were all pitched in and so forth around the runways, flooded very easily, and in particular got super saturated when it rained heavily, as it did. And so quickly, everything became a quagmire around the runways, particularly when you had Bradley fighting vehicles and Abrams tanks, which were part of a very heavy sort of protective package that European Command had sent down with the Apaches to protect the aviation force. And those tanks and Bradley started digging up, basically, with their treads, the fields around the airstrip, and everybody was then walking through knee-deep mud everywhere, and sometimes deeper. And I watched at least one soldier have to get pulled out of the mud with ropes because she had gotten herself so sort of stuck in there. So that was Task Force Hawk. I think in the end, then I went back in 2000 or maybe 2001. I may be getting the years off by one here, but before 9/11 anyway, I went back once the Kosovo War was over and US forces had been sent in to do peacekeeping there. I went back and embedded with them, and you know, again, just an interesting time. Um, much different environment than sort of the Somalia and Haiti type sort of embeds and deployments, because you were dealing in this case with European towns and cities. So things to the Western eye would have seemed sort of slightly more comfortable. So I know that some of the soldiers were a bit weirded out in Kosovo, because they thought they were going to be going into some war-torn hellhole, and they show up and there are, attractive Mediterranean-looking women walking around in nice clothes, and grocery stores, and everything just sort of just like other sort of European towns. So that was it, and then after that we've talked already about 9/11 and what followed.